Welcome to Legion Radio, a podcast about all things e-commerce, the official podcast of the private label Legion, hosted by Tim Jordan.
Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Legion Radio, the official podcast of the private label Legion e-commerce community. We're super excited you're here. Glad to have you on another episode. We hope that we provide some really cool value, some really cool tips, and we hope that you get engaged with us. If you're watching this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Check us out also on our Facebook group, Private Label Legion, like our Facebook page, Private Label Legion. And today we are bringing you a titan of the, what do we call this? Crowdsource testing? Is that what we call it, Justin?
Yeah.
Yeah. A titan of the crowdsource testing industry, Justin Chen from PickFu. PickFu spelled P-I-C-K-F-U. And I don't think I've ever yelled F-U on a podcast before. So there we go. Never thought about that. So those of you that are listening in and not on YouTube and can't click the link, make sure to go to PickFu, P-I-C-K-F-U.com to find out more about their service. But this is not a sales pitch. We are not pitching PickFu. I'm just bringing Justin in because he has some killer content, some killer tips and advice for us. He has a pretty cool story about how he accidentally found his way into the e-com world, much like I did. And we're going to share that today. So, Justin, thank you so much for being on. We hope that you're glad you're here.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Happy to be on the podcast.
So you don't know this, Justin, but I've been kind of lurking around your service for a while. I've seen the PickFu name. I've talked about PickFu before in some training content I've done. We've kind of seen you all over the industry making waves. And a lot of people probably are familiar with your service, might not even understand the power of it, or and not just your service, but kind of what you do in general is crowdsource testing. So I want to clear up some misconceptions. I want to help people understand when, why, how they would use crowdsource testing, whatever service they're using, what's PickFu or something else.
Yeah.
But first, I want to kind of go over again your story of how you fell into this space. I just mentioned that you kind of fell into this by accident, but you were actually in the food service industry. Is that right?
Yeah. So we were, my partner John and I were running a restaurant review and menu aggregator website before this, and we still have it. So we started working on that project back in 2006. And so we've been, entrepreneurs for a really long time. And while we were building that, we needed feedback on a redesign. We're both engineers and have horrible design sense. So we're like, okay, let's build a service. The other reason was, we kept reaching out to friends and family for questions. And as an entrepreneur, you tend to do that. But I think you wear out your welcome after, I don't know what it is, 10, 20, 100 questions. Yeah. And I think your friends and family are just like, just choose whatever you think is best. And, they start to be a little less helpful. So we built PickFu to give us crowdsource feedback on redesign. And, we kind of threw it up there. We used it ourselves. We shared it with some entrepreneurs and then kind of went about our business, continuing to build the other business. And probably about 5 years ago, PickFu just started taking off by itself. It started getting a lot more traction. The lean startup movement was in full effect, and people were doing idea validation. They wanted data-driven decisions. And so we jumped into the entrepreneur market, just trying to market it to, testing logos, ideas, all that kind of stuff. We meandered from there into self-publishing authors. And so a lot of authors use it to test book titles, book covers, kind of anything that you're going to publish live that you can't test live or you can't take it back, right? So you want data before you make these decisions. From there, we meandered into mobile app development. A lot of the biggest mobile game companies actually use PickFu to test app icons, app store screenshots, even the game creatives that they're going to use, like which characters should we develop. And game development, app development is super expensive. So any data they can get early on is really valuable in their decision-making process. E-commerce kind of fell in our lap about 2 years ago. I think it was Manny who mentioned us on one of his podcasts, AM PM podcast. And he talked about it for split testing images. And we started getting all these sellers coming in, and we discovered that this is a great segment for us. There's so many decisions that sellers have to make throughout their product lifecycle. And a lot of them are doing it blindly. They're not gathering any kind of data. They're not talking to their customers necessarily. And we found that it really helps them have the more confidence to make the right decision.
Yeah, so that's a little bit interesting that you bounced around so many things that worked, right?
Yeah.
Like right now, I know e-commerce represents and specifically Amazon sellers represent like 50% of your business.
Yeah.
And one crazy lesson that I pull out of that is the other things worked, like the mobile app development, the game development, the menu, the restaurant menus, that worked. And it makes me wonder, like, so many times in business, we as entrepreneurs like to put a pass fail on everything. Like this worked or it didn't.
Yep.
And sometimes we put a pass on something, this works, when it could work better. Or there could be something better out there. Like, what if you guys had always just stuck to the restaurant menu space?
Yeah.
Would you have been successful? Probably, but nowhere near as successful as if you didn't accidentally get roped in this other stuff. So maybe a valuable lesson there is like, just because it's working doesn't mean it's fully optimized, or that we need to close off the potential, to look for other possible revenue streams and stuff like that. I don't know, just random crazy thought I'm having, but
yeah, I mean, it's almost like
that.
Even if it's working, don't necessarily settle, right? Because there could be something that works even better, like a more interesting opportunity or bigger opportunity.
Okay. So don't settle. That doesn't necessarily mean like your spouse. We're just talking about split testing, right? And as a side note, split testing your spouse probably doesn't work, right? That's probably frowned upon. All right.
Some people use it for dating profile images and stuff like that, but don't take it too extreme.
Images only. All right. I'm sure there's some creepy uses for PickFu out there. So you fell into the e-commerce space, and now like 50% at least of your business comes from, largely Amazon sellers. Yeah. So you've been in the Amazon seller space, kind of understanding pain points, tips, tricks, all that stuff for a couple of years now. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. About a couple of years.
So you're involved in all sorts of entrepreneurial things. All right. The restaurant space is very entrepreneurial. Yep. Mobile app development, gaming, that's all actually very entrepreneurial. What would you say is like the biggest shock about e-commerce entrepreneurs versus maybe the other entrepreneurs? Or what's something you've noticed is very unique about e-commerce sellers than the other areas you've worked in?
Well, I think why we like e-commerce sellers is that they are entrepreneurial. So a lot of times it's solo founders or small teams, but they're much more business minded about their decisions, and that's great, right? Because then they understand the value of getting feedback and testing. I think with some other segments like authors, like they may not be as business minded, so that the value of testing is a little bit harder to convince them. But I think with sellers, it's a little bit easier. Mobile game companies are larger companies, so it's more of a corporate B2B kind of relationship. But yeah, e-commerce sellers are great because I think they're super driven. They understand that they're running a business, that they need to gather data, they need to market, they need to optimize their processes, and so it's a joy working with them.
Awesome. So I know that a lot of people might on a very, very surface level understand the idea of testing, sure. Like, well, which one works better? Great. Like we don't want to shake our 8-ball and, assume it gives us an answer like we actually want to. That the term I use, going back to my old Southern grandpa, was measure twice, cut once. Right. And I'd like to think that's a carpentry term, but it probably had to do with like me trying to cut my own hair when I was a little kid or something. Like, you can't go back. So measure twice, cut once. I also like the expression, like you got to slow down to speed up. Like it would be really cool if we could just throw stuff up really fast. But if we really want to increase the trajectory of what we're doing in our success, we have to slow down, do a little bit more investigation to make sure that, we're doing it right the first time. Yeah. I've also heard the term, if you do it right the first time, you only cry once. Right. So maybe we take a little bit more time, or we have to spend a few bucks to get these split testings done. But then we only cry once. We're not 6 months later realizing, oh, we massively screwed up. We should have done it the other way. So you like my Southern expressions I'm pulling out now, my terminology? I don't think I've ever used 3 of those back to back like I just did. So I think
if I try to retell it, I'm going to mix them all up and it'll sound
It's
horrible.
like you remember Tommy Boy when he's like, I could stick my head up a butcher's cat. Yeah,
that was awesome.
All right, that's awesome. I also didn't expect to be talking about Tommy Boy sticking his head up a butcher's butt today, but there you go. All right, so let's start sharing some kind of your inside information, your tips, tricks, your wisdom that you've learned with some e-commerce sellers. So what I want to do is let's talk about the importance of testing. Can you give us just a few minute really overall hey guys, you're really missing the boat if you're not split testing.
Yeah.
And hey, start out with telling what split testing is.
Yeah. So let me back up a little bit and make the distinction between the type of testing that we do versus maybe more traditional with split testing, live split testing. So, some people are kind of aware of split testing in the sense of Optimizely or Splitly, where you're live testing on a website or on your Amazon listing, and it's actually just showing one version of it at a given time. And so then what you're doing is you're tracking the performance of either variation over a certain number of visits, and then seeing what the conversion is. So when we talk about testing or split testing, we're doing it privately off your final platform. So this is more of what we call a preference test, right? We're actually showing the variations and we're asking people to respond to it. And what's nice about this is that there's no impact on your final business. You're not putting up variations that you're scared for your customers to see. And all the feedback that you gather is private, right? So you can actually not only see which one won, but all of our, on PickFu, they actually give written feedback. So you can actually read why. And that's usually where we find customers saying they got the most value. So I think with split testing, I think most people need to implement it earlier in the decision-making process, especially sellers. We're typically known for split testing images on their listing, which is a great use case. But we find that our savvier sellers are actually using it much earlier in their product development cycle. So whether they're working on product sourcing, or maybe they're working on a new product design and they want to get feedback on it, getting feedback at these really early stages and private feedback on something that doesn't even exist yet is a great way to avoid mistakes. You're not spending $50,000 on a product that, people don't like because the handle's in the wrong place. And you could have had that feedback, with a $50 poll on PickFu.
So you're not talking about just split testing images. You're talking about split testing a lot of different aspects of our business,
yes.
Right? It's not just listing photos. It's also product design. It's maybe even product use cases, right?
Yeah, exactly.
You can test how you would explain why they would want to have this product or use this. You could go infinitely deep on this, right?
Yeah. What's great is that you can go super open-ended as well. So one of our types of polls isn't even comparing anything. It's just saying, hey, give me open-ended feedback on this idea or this image. And sometimes you get a lot of interesting ideas about how to optimize your listing or your product, or even the solution that you're planning to offer. And so maybe you want to do something to deal with pot handlers or something. And you ask everyone, how do you handle this scenario? And you would just get 50 people explaining how they handle it in their everyday life, what solutions they would prefer to have. And those are also awesome ideas from your target audience that you could use to craft the perfect solution.
Yeah, super awesome. So what you've done is you've made it fairly simple to crowdsource, split testing, but I know there's a lot of other ways to do that. I've seen people do stuff run 2 different images in a Facebook ad with a super low budget to the same audience and see which one gets more engagement. That's one way of doing it. It's even as simple as I've seen people post on their private Facebook message or a Facebook wall. Hey, here's 2 different options. Which one do you like most? A million way of doing this. So I'm going to ask you some personal questions now about PickFu, if that's okay.
Sure.
How on earth do you find testers, and where do you get the testers? What is the audience? I know you guys, you advertise 50 impressions in 20 minutes or some, what's your thing?
Yeah. So we can get 50 responses in a matter of 15 minutes. 15
minutes, 50 and 15. So who are these people?
Yeah, so we work with a third-party panel service that we use to reach out to all the people who want to respond to surveys. So we pay them for every response.
Got it.
So they're all US-based respondents, and they're not people that are getting their content blocked with ads or seeing a mobile ad. And they're motivated to do these because they've opted in to do it. Additionally, we've collected all this information about them, and we have a history of all their responses. So every explanation that comes in, we run it through our own machine learning algorithm that analyzes their responses. It automatically scores them. We have a curator that goes through and kicks off bad respondents. And we really try to curate a really good pool of people. Even when customers can vote on helpful comments, when you're looking at the poll and you're hey, that was really awesome. That kind of feedback will go into give bonuses to our respondents and make sure that they're really happy doing our polls. And that's why it happens so quickly, because our respondents love doing the polls, and they really try to be genuine and earnest in their feedback.
I would have never guessed that there is that deep of I thought it was just like throw it out to the audience that you guys had access to and get answered. I didn't realize there was machine learning and AI stuff and
no, man, we
curated.
We take the respondent quality very, very seriously.
Okay, awesome. But you can target the demographic, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm testing the color of a kid's plush toy, I can target kid, or maybe not kids, but like even in that scenario, I could target the decision-making purchasers and not a bunch of, old crusty dudes that never buy plush toys for their kids.
Yeah, exactly. Right? So you could say just females. You could say that they have to have kids. You could even say that they're Amazon Prime shoppers. So we have all these different segmentations already built in. We have some things even like if they take nutritional supplements, like whether they exercise frequently, all these kind of behavioral type things that might be an indication that they're your target audience. Because
you don't want to send supplement and health stuff to somebody that hasn't been in a gym in 6 months and isn't going to
exactly. They're not going to care.
Because they would have a strong opinion, but their opinion doesn't carry as much weight. Is that right?
For sure. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. I had no idea all that was done. That's awesome. So there's a lot of strategy and tactics and science behind pick testing. It's not just a surface level, hey, pick A or B,
Mm-hmm.
When people are split testing products, whether it's with a very advanced simple system like yours or manually, the system is only good as what people are asking it, I assume.
Yeah.
And they're only as good as what type of information they're expecting to get, or being open-minded enough to really interpret that information. So that being said, we can screw this up. Is that a fair statement to say? Like we can screw up split testing regardless of what system you're using. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that you see people making, specifically in the e-commerce space, when they're trying to use crowdsourced testing models?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest mistake is that when they're testing, like say multiple things, or even if you're doing a live split test, and is putting too many variations in the different options. So what I mean by that is, let's use a book as an example, because it's a little easier. If you had 2 different book titles and 2 different cover designs at the same time, then you wouldn't really know why one won over the other. And whether you're doing that on Facebook or whether you're doing that on a PickFu, it's the same thing. It's like, oh, okay, option B won. Oh, well, but you had a different cover and a different title. Then how are you going to know, what the reason was, right? So you should always try to hold, it's kind of like the scientific method, right? You got to hold everything else in control, and then you only got to test one thing, and you're going to get the best information that way, right? So test the title first. Once you've solidified the title, test the cover. And that goes the same for product imagery, or let's say product design. We have one customer right now who's going through literally like hundreds of iterations of packaging design tests, because they are testing one thing at a time. Like, okay, we're going to add this text and this text, and everything else is the same on the packaging, and they're just incrementally testing every aspect of the packaging because they really want to get it right. It's going to be an in-store package, and they want to make sure like everything about it is spot on. And so they're taking it very seriously, and they're not just trying to like cheap out and be like, hey, I'm just going to throw this other design in that's got all the different text and different placement. And that's, you're not going to get good feedback that way.
How much is too much? Like at what point do we decide, all right, we got to crap or get off the pot here?
Yeah.
Right. Is there a magical number, or?
There's not a magical number, but I mean, as you start, I guess, getting too minute in your variations, then you're probably getting too far down the rabbit hole. And as the score started approaching like 50-50, then it doesn't really matter, right? Like a lot of people will get tied results, and some people will say like, hey, like this didn't work, like give me my money back. It's like, well, that's not actually true. Like if it's a tied result, that's actual valid feedback. That means
it probably tells you that you're fairly well optimized.
Yeah, you can do either one, and there's not going to really be a difference. So as you're approaching that 50-50, it's almost like, okay, cool. Like either way, my audience is okay with it. So, at that point you could be like, all right, I'm good. Like things are good.
I would have never guessed that, but so balanced is done. Like
For
now
sure.
it's time
Like,
to
if you're hitting
really
like 50-50 all the time, it's like your audience doesn't care. They're happy with A and they're happy with B. They'll go either
or
way.
you're not asking for specific enough differences. Like
Yeah.
you're not giving them a big enough decision,
Yeah.
so spread it out or move on. All right.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Any other mistakes you see people making? Going too deep, trying to test one little thing at a time, not looking quite big picture enough. I'm thinking of another problem people might have, but I'm going to see if you have the same one.
So in our case, like we see people asking too complicated questions, I guess. So we try to keep it simple, and we suggest people say like, which product would you buy? You can get some context. You could say like, if you're shopping for shoes, like which athletic shoe would you buy? But some people really try to just like stuff all the questions in there, and then it gets really confusing, and like not everyone's answering all the same questions, and so that's an issue that we do have, and I think a lot of people. It's kind of like the same thing with the variation thing. They're trying to get too many things out of a single test. And, you're not going to get great data that way.
Yeah. So the one I was thinking of is, and you probably see this all the time, but people don't trust the data.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that I suspect, and I'm just going to speak for myself. That's why I kind of have this in the back of my mind is I can be stubborn and I can feel really strongly about something and convince myself that I'm right and the data's wrong. So where I have struggled a little bit in some split testing before is I didn't trust it. Like I was too emotionally attached to what I wanted the data to be, right? That I didn't trust it. So, I just speaking from experience for myself, everybody that's listening to this, like if you're going to pay for the information, it's unbiased opinion. Like people aren't going to give you wrong information for the heck of it. That doesn't happen. But if you're really deeply attached to a picture and the audience and the data says this other image is better, like remember that we love our business, but we can't be in love with something that's not going to help it succeed. So even if, like where I've seen this, I had a client once that they had this baby product and they had these god awful lifestyle images. It's because they took them at their house with their baby, which was not that cute. Like everybody that says all babies are cute, you're wrong. I'm sorry. There are just some ugly babies out there. And I know that sounds terrible, but like babies when they're born, on side tangent, are not cute. They come out bald and pink and they ain't got no teeth. Someone said look more like a grandpa than a baby. Right? So, but if I was a mom and I'm selling a baby product, like I want to be emotionally attached to this product related to my child. And this client, that's what they did is they had this brand new, like literally 1 day old, like they're at the hospital trying to do this photo shoot and it was not a good situation. And the baby didn't even fit the stuff properly. But her argument was, well, my family will represent my brand the best. And I'm like, okay, sometimes, yes, like represent the brand, but not necessarily fill the picture. And we did and to prove it, like we did a split test. I'm like, look, run these images and run these stock images of a product almost exactly like yours that are just halfway professional. And the stock images pulled like 91% of the votes. But she still argued. She's like, no, but they don't understand the importance of my brand and my family. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Who gives a crap when you're testing two images of what the backstory is behind the images? Nobody cares. So tell that brand story, tell your family's position and all that stuff within your brand somewhere else, but don't do it in the images. So for me, one of those other mistakes is getting too emotionally invested in an image. Yeah,
I mean, I think when you go into testing, however you're doing any kind of testing or validation, you have to go into it with the open mindset and not just like you got to be true to yourself about why you're testing. If it's just to reinforce the fact that you love the image that you took or the title that you made, then, that what's the point, right? Because if it doesn't come out right, you're not going to use it. I would say the most common feedback we get from our customers, and it's great, is that they'll come back and say like, hey, I'm so glad I ran this test because the option that I wanted and that was mine didn't win. And if I had never run this test, I wouldn't have known that. And those are like really honest people where they're saying like, hey, I was wrong. I'm glad I did the test. And, I'm going to go with the data. We had a really funny case study with one of our early authors, and he's got a best-selling book now. And he came to us because he wanted to prove his publisher wrong, that his book cover design was way better than the boring one that they suggested. And so he kept running PickFu tests, like it's hit, It didn't look great. It's funny. It's on the blog. You gotta. We should link to it because it's the design. If you saw it, you're like, really? I agree with the PickFu test for sure in this one.
Send me a link to that, and I'll make sure that Eric gets it and puts it in the show notes.
Yeah, because
so those of you that are watching this now on YouTube, that link should be in your show notes.
He was so tied to it, and publishers design like one kept winning, and he's like, all right, they win, and he went with it and became a bestseller. So he went with the data. And it turned out well for him, but that was the perfect example of like, people fall in love with their stuff, but as long as you're honest with yourself and like you're willing to trust the data, like it works. Yeah,
that's super, super valuable information. So anything else, any other problems that you're seeing people making in crowdsourced split testing or crowdsourced testing? And if not, that's cool. Like we don't want to dump too many. Like let's hit the high level stuff. What else? If you're sitting in front of a room, which kind of essentially you are, to e-commerce sellers that whether they're experienced split testers or they haven't done it before, what's another like solid piece of advice we can end on to guide them on their crowdsourced testing journey? Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I guess the last thing that I would say is that whether this is crowdsourcing or using a tool like PickFu, is that like you need to get feedback from your customers. This is something that we really believe in, and we follow it every day. And we try to have conversations with customers, whether it's just over email or setting up one-on-one chats with kind of anyone that will talk to us. We love talking to our customers and letting that guide both our marketing and our product decisions. And I think all entrepreneurs and sellers especially should try to do this more often, because I think it's too easy to feel like, you're behind the computer and you're selling these things or selling these widgets or software or whatever, and it's just money coming in. But you need to understand the buying decisions and the mentality that your customers have and the problems that you're solving, or maybe you don't solve, right? And so you try to talk to customers that don't buy it as well. And so that's the advice that I would give to any entrepreneur, to any sellers, find ways to have these conversations, either over the phone or in person. Okay, great. Well, thank you for coming on today. I know that we're about to the extent of our time where people start to nod off and lose interest and stop absorbing information, so we'll wrap it up. But any of you that are interested in split testing, crowdsourced testing, go out and check it out. There's a lot of different options. Look, I know I've got Justin up here from PickFu. It's not because he's sponsoring. It's not because he's paying for this spot. None of that stuff. We try to go to some of the industry's best, and we determine that by I understand what their product is, but I also get a lot of feedback, and PickFu right now is killing it in the e-commerce game with people using them. People love them. So check them out, pickfu.com, pickfu.com. Also in the show notes, we've got an email address where you can contact them directly. And then also in the show notes, now we've got the link to that blog that shows what we were talking about earlier. Yeah. So any last random comments or anything before we sign off, Justin? No, I mean, I think, keep working on your business, get customer feedback, and you'll crush it. Awesome. Well, thank y'all again for listening. You have just wrapped up another episode of Legion Radio. I've always wanted to say that. I feel like it's something that would be on like NPR or like one of those old school 50s things. But anyways, thank y'all for listening. Hit that subscribe button. Follow us. Thumbs up, vote us, whatever you got to do. Share us. If you're watching this, share it on social media. If you're in a Facebook group that you think other people would like to hear this information, just share this post or share this link or whatever you want to do. And let's get the information out there. Keep educating people. And Justin, thank you again so much for being on. I'm going to see you in Vegas next month, March 2020. We got ASD, we got Prosper, we got all sorts of cool stuff coming up. So we'll look forward to seeing you then. And thanks again for being on. We're going to sign off this episode of Legion Radio.
You've just wrapped up another episode of Legion Radio, hosted by Tim Jordan. Past episodes, links, and show notes can be found at privatelabellegion.com.